Hey guys, this is Alan Stewart with B&B Yacht Designs, and today I am going to be doing a virtual tour of the new Class Globe 580 kit. I think we're all done with the files at this point, or at least to the point where we're ready to probably cut one of these out. So I just want to say thanks to Don McIntyre for letting us work on this project with him. It's been a lot of fun so far. And when we first saw this design come out, we shot an email off to him and just kind of snowballed from there. So sailboats are really our passion, and we're fortunate to have been working on this project, and I think it came out really nice, and we're looking forward to seeing some of these kits go together. So I'll get straight into it. I've got a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to focus on the details of the kit specifically, and then the assembly, and we'll just see where it goes. I'll probably put some links to various sections of the video for people who want to skip through. But yeah, let's get into it. Alright, first I think I'll talk about some of the unique modifications, or not modifications so much as additions that we've made in the process of 3D modeling the boat that I think are going to be instrumental in the success of the kit. And so some early design decisions for the kit, one of which was to go with the watertight bulkhead. So if you're familiar with the plans, or if you're not, this central bulkhead here that supports the mast is frame D1, and that is a solid bulkhead, and in the kit it'll be a solid plywood bulkhead with a butt block down the middle, obviously because it's too big to fit in a sheet. And builders can choose to cut a hatch here, install a custom or an off-the-shelf hatch, or if you're not doing a around the world race, you can put a regular hatch in there. Also, because we've put a solid ply bulkhead on the aft side of frame D1, the dimensions, the outer dimensions for this frame are to the aft side, and so the size of this frame is different to what's shown on the plans. It's slightly larger. And so if you're building from plans and you'd like to build this frame as a solid bulkhead as shown here, then we'll give you a sheet that has the different dimensions for the aft side of D1. The other bulkhead back here, which is frame A, frame A, it's also going to be cut solid in the kit. The plans show a hatch here at the bottom of the bunk, but in the racing version, this would be a solid watertight bulkhead, and if it did have a hatch, it would be one that was sealable, off-the-shelf hatch, or a panel that was glued in place. In the cockpit, we have no hatch built in here. B&B has a nice watertight hatch design that I have not modeled, but we can provide plans for that, separately if somebody wanted to do build their own hatch. Of course, you could put a off-the-shelf hatch, in the top of the seat top here. Moving forward, in the kit, we've included the side of the bunk. And that will come into play later when I show you the assembly of the kit. We've also included the bunk top panels and the galley box here. So as per Don's request, at least this is how he's going to do it on his boat. Instead of a 2.2 meter bunk, we have a 2 meter bunk. And bear with me while I turn on some people. So here's a guy sleeping in a 2 meter bunk, and it's a generous bunk space. And that gives you the galley box here. You can have your athwartship sleeping arrangement with a lift out sole panel. You can do whatever you want to do with the galley here. There's this box is port and starboard in the kit. We've included every piece of plywood with the exception of some of the companionway parts. So here we have the sliding hatch as designed by Giannis. And those parts are not in the kit, but there is enough plywood left over to fabricate those parts. For the around the world version, I suspect that you wouldn't have this particular hatch design, and so in the observation dome, in that case, you might choose to leave out this panel, which is the floor of the sort of turtle or garage for the sliding hatch. And instead, you would just install a weather-tight hatch or whatever hatch you want in the slanted frame here. And in the kit, the slanted frame is going to be manufactured as a solid bulkhead, so you can cut whatever size hatch you want into that slanted frame. We have done a set of port lights in the side of the shear strake to the size shown in the plans, as well as in the observation dome side and forward port. These would be polycarbonate, and in the kit we've got 9mm inside trim ring doublers to give you extra meat to fasten the polycarbonate to from the outside. So the polycarbonate is 20mm wider than the actual cutout for fasteners. We haven't made any cutouts in the deck panel. The cabin top panel, there's two hatches shown, a vent hatch and a egress hatch in the forward part of the hull there. Those are solid. This panel is a solid piece in the kit, except it's split down just behind bulkhead D1 with a butt block. Frame E, we've added a bulkhead up to the crash box height on frame E. We've also, I believe this bulkhead was shown in the plans, but we've also included this crash box top in the kit. You're seeing it in half section here, but you get the full piece, obviously. And so this was the crash box, and we've also taken the knee, the stem knee, as drawn in the plans, and we've extended it. If I can grab it here, we've extended it back to frame E and notched the bottom beam of frame E so that the knee actually dados into that frame, which helps to locate the stem. The stem is in two pieces. There's a inner stem and then a stem cap, and those are CNC cut, and I'll get into the details of those in a little bit. So what else? We've designed in all the butt blocks for the side, chine, and bottom planking, as well as the doubler for the skeg and the chain plate reinforcement. We've really tried to think of everything that we could. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get into some of the details of the parts. Alright, this is the part sheet as of today, May 10th. This is all of the parts that are CNC cut in the kit. So what you're seeing here, all the black lines are obviously 9mm plywood. All of these parts come out of 25 sheets of 9mm marine plywood. So there's the sheets, and the brown parts obviously are solid timber. Those are also CNC cut. And the blue dashed lines here are pen lines. So these are drawn by a ballpoint pen using the CNC machine, and we use that for all the part numbering and also for drawing on reference lines, which I'll get to in a little bit. On the frames, this kit is unique in that it has a lot of solid timber framing, because it's not a stitch and glue boat. It's frame and plank construction. So on the inside of all the frames, we have solid timber framing. So just in this example, here we have frame E. And so here are the timber parts for frame E. So this is, to the plan. We have a top beam, side pieces, chine pieces, and then we have various gussets that connect over the joints frame E also has a second beam on the aft side. Here's that frame that's on the back side of frame E. There's the dado for the stem knee. And you can see all these pieces are numbered with a frame letter and then a number, and usually they're going in a circular pattern. So I have E1, E2, E3, E4. And because all these parts look very similar, we've also added a reference identifier, and that's this little circle here. It's about a 4mm diameter circle. The circle is on any part, especially the small parts, where it's not clear which way they might go. So for example, this gusset E9, the dot indicates the topmost corner or the innermost corner. So in this case, if you're just looking at this part, you would see the dot, and basically if you pinched the part at the dot with your fingers and let the part fall by gravity, that's kind of the orientation that the part would take in the frame. So that will hopefully help to position these parts properly, because this part is almost but not quite a mirror image fore and aft. And that brings up another point. In the kit, all the parts, many of the parts are port and starboard. For example, we have 2 E9s. And it would be really easy to just take this part and copy it and cut out 2 of them. The problem with that is that when you put this part in the correct spot over here, if you have the pen line facing the user, then the part's upside down. So we take the extra step to actually include a port and a starboard proper part. So you will get a port and a starboard part, and so when you assemble the frame, all of the indicator marks will be facing the user in pretty much every case. In order to keep from losing all these gussets, we've combined the gussets for each frame into clusters. So here is a gusset cluster for frame A, and here's the other one. So these parts here contain 3 gussets connected with small plywood bridges, and this one has 4 gussets with bridges. And this is just helpful when CNC cutting, that we don't have these tiny pieces flying all over the place. So these would just be broken apart, and then a quick sand to clean up these bridges. Here is frame D1. This is the mass support frame, and this is a good example of one of the frames that is a solid plywood frame, and you can see all the blue lines are reference lines. So when you assemble this frame, you'll put the butt block across the joint on the forward side of the frame, and you've got these lines referencing where all the cleats go, all the framing. So here's all the framing for frame D1, and you can see it's similar. It's ringed with these timber pieces that are all numbered with the dots and the lettering. We have frame D and also frame D1, and so with the part numbering, frame D is numbered with a D, and frame D1 is numbered with a hyphenated D. That's the way we decided to do it. So yeah, so these red parts, these parts are the keel floors and the posts for the mast, and these are too thick to be CNC cut. So what we've decided to do is include templates for these keel floors here, and these are just dimensional stock. So this is something that could be supplied in a full timber kit, or these oak pieces could be sourced locally by the builder and cut. And I'll show you really quickly the template for that. So here's a template for the keel floors. The keel floors have obviously a forward and aft edge. So here we have the 5 keel floor timbers. The black line is the forward edge of the true cutout for that chine log, and the red line is the aft edge. So what we've done for the templates is we've taken the absolute outer perimeter of those 2 lines and provided that as a template. So you could cut all these parts out on a bandsaw, and when you fit them into the jig, you could do your final beveling and not worry about cutting away too much material. So this is a 1-to-1 template of the half size of the the keel floors. The other frames follow the same logic. Here we have frame C. We've added in the kit these partial bulkheads for frame C where they go underneath the bunk tops. Frame S, we named S for slant. It's the slanted frame, which is the companionway frame. And here you can see this, the bulkhead part of the frame, the plywood part, is in 3 pieces because it's too large, so there's a butt block here at the bottom. And there's a forward and aft side. Frame S is one of the more complicated frames. Here we have the forward side and all the pieces associated with the forward side and the aft side. And for assembly of the frames, we have a sheet showing how the parts go onto the plywood. Frame S is also unique in that it's at such an angle to the other parts. So a few of the details there. The top beam here, which is S8, is left proud of the plywood bulkhead, and then it's beveled to receive the foredeck. We've also given the bevel for the bottom of frame S, and that's where it intersects with the bottom planking. And also on the aft side of frame S, here we have the framing that supports the side deck, the seat top, and the cockpit sole, and those can also be beveled prior to assembly of the frame itself. The dimensions of all these match the plans in almost every case. Giannis really did a very nice job with the plans, and we found all the dimensions to be very accurate. And so you'll find these dimensions match with the plans, which they should do because it's the same boat. And here's another example of a frame. You know, we try to think of what information will you need to assemble this frame. And helpful information is like diagonals here for checking the squareness of the frame and the overall dimensions, of course. But because the parts are all pre-notched to the minimum notch for the various stringers, we can't measure straight to the corner very easily. So, you know, we've made an effort to try to mark where we're actually measuring to. So you can hook your tape measure, for example, on this corner and send it across to this space and check your diagonal in that way. The transom frame and also frame A are both solid plywood frames. Here they are, here and here, and they both have a fair amount of framing. The transom frame could be assembled using the transom as the template. So here's the pen lines all drawn on the transom. So you could lay all your transom framing onto the transom and glue down all your gussets, and you could install that in the jig without the actual transom panel. And that's nice because you can then let your battens and your side stringers run, fly past the transom, trim them off later, and then glue the transom panel on. There aren't any dimensions given for the transom because they're all drawn. All the parts locations are drawn on the transom. There is another sheet in the kit plans that shows all these parts in a larger scale because it's difficult to read all the numbers here for the bulkheads. In addition to all of the frames, we have CNC cut parts for the stem cap, and also the knee gusset. The knee is in 2 layers, so it's laminated together. And we've also provided a sheet that gives that knee shape as well as the inner stem in full size, so that if you are building from plans and you can get your hands on this sheet, you could cut these parts out and fit them in, because that will help you to locate frame E and also the stem. And that also leads me over to this jig drawing. So we've designed a strong back with dimensions for building the jig on. In the US, this is 2x6 dimensional lumber, which is 38 millimeters by 140 millimeters. The actual size of the jig itself does not really matter. It could be any material really. We've tried to dimension it so that we're referencing the inside of the framing. So you could build this out of any material. And we have these upright posts here, which in the US we would use 2x4s, but whatever is available anywhere. And it really doesn't matter for that matter. But this sheet shows all the frames in their location on the jig, with the height of the frame above the jig line, and also the location of the frame relative to the transom, which is as they were dimensioned in the plans. The stem, we've given a height for the top of the CNC cut stem and the knee, and you can see here where the stem knee is dadoed into the bottom of frame E. And so we've got an offset for the stem, which gives you the stem rake, and the stem is fastened onto the forward side of a little upright here, and the height of the stem is provided there. We've also have CNC cut deck beams. There are 4 deck beams, 3 additional bottom floors, and also some fore and aft beams included, as well as these are plywood templates for the skeg and rudder, which we were able to fit in the sheets as well. These are the polycarbonate shapes for the port lights, and those are also provided at 1:1 scale if you want to cut out your own port lights. And if you want to do something different for the ports, then you should just contact your kit manufacturer and say, please cut me out a shear strake panel that does not have any cutouts in it. And I'm sure they'd be happy to do that, and you could put in your own ports if you wanted to do larger or smaller or whatever. I think that just about covers the kit parts. So here are the solid timber parts nested in the boards. And so we CNC cut these parts directly into boards. These boards are 8 inches by 96 inches, or 2440 by 203. And all these parts are finished thickness of 22 millimeters. So the way we typically do that is we surface the top of the board, we draw our location information with a pen on the parts, and then we mill out these shapes in the board, but we don't cut all the way through. So we leave a skin on the bottom of the board, which you can then plane off through the thickness planer, and all these parts just fall onto the floor. It's brilliant. Every time I do it, I enjoy it. So there you can see all the solid timber parts, with the exception of the mast supports, posts, and the keel floors, which brings me over to this model here. These 2 models are all the parts that are not included in the CNC cut kit, but could be included in a full timber kit depending on your kit supplier. So this top one shows all of the hull stringer material, as well as the length of each of these, which will be helpful also for someone building from plans. These are the exact lengths of the parts, so you'd want to add a little bit for sizing these. So those are the chine battens, or chine logs, or whatever you want to call these particular pieces, the chine pieces. And these are the panel stiffeners, the stringers for the chine planking and the side planking. And here we have this other model. These purple parts are not included in the kit sheet that I just showed you. Neither are the keel floors. So these are either sourced by the builder, and these parts here. These are the athwartship parts that are clearly identified in the plans. You got all this grain running across here, and you got your mast sitting right here. So you want these particular pieces of timber to be nice and strong. These could be supplied by the kit manufacturer, or they could be just cut by the builder. These other pieces that you see, these are framing pieces for the bunk top. These are not included in the kit. They could be, again, these pieces could be included in the kit, but they are not CNC cut. So this would be an additional timber, package that would accompany the kit, that you would rip all these pieces out. So these are all the cockpit cleats for supporting the sole, the seat tops, the backrest combings, and the side decks. And those are 8 pieces, and there's the size of those if you're following along at home. There's also a few pieces of solid timber in the observation dome, which I didn't dimension out, as well as a frame around the top of the crash box. While I'm here in the model, this is a displacement model of the 580, and so you can screenshot this if you're interested in the displacement. We have the displacement at the design waterline, and also at -10 to -80 millimeters of displacement, and you can see it's about 75 kilograms per centimeter of immersion. Since we just got some clarification on the glassing schedule, I decided to also show some surface areas. So this is the total surface area of all the hull panels, 20.2 square meters, and all of the deck panels, which includes all the cockpit panels, is 14.6 square meters. And in our case, at least for kits in our area in the US, we will probably be cutting all of the plywood components from 9mm Akumi marine plywood, because we don't have access to 10mm without special ordering it. So in that case, the hull lamination, the outer lamination for the 9mm Akumi was given as 1,170 grams per square meter, and for the deck 430 grams per square meter. And so I converted that into ounces per square yard for our US glass purchasing. And so for the hull, the outer lamination would be 2 layers of 1,700 ounce, or 1,700, which is 17.9 ounce, and for the deck it'd be a single layer of 1,200, which is 12.5 ounce, which is very close. And then of course the joints are also taped with fiberglass, and then it's just this is just the outer lamination to bring the hull planking up to the required strength. This is another little addendum sheet that we did, and this is showing the dimensions of the bunk side. So in the kit, this is right here, and I've got my dots turned off. Let me turn the dots back on here. Bear with me 1 second. They just get big when I zoom out. These are parts 24, 25, and 26 is the butt block, and you can see those are listed as bunk sides fore and aft. And so if you're building from plans, this part is nice to have, and I'll show you why in a second. But this is that part dimensioned out. If you're building from plans, you could cut this part out, and it will help you with the jig assembly, because what we actually do is we install this part into frame A and frame D1 as part of the jig assembly. So, all right, here's the frames floating in space, and I'll just give you a quick view of each one, starting at the transom. There's the transom with all its framing. This is frame A, and again, this gives you an idea of all the notching that's been pre-done in these kit parts. So you've got notching already done for all of the support for inside the cockpit. Here is the slanted frame, fore and aft. There you can see that butt block on the slanted frame. This red line indicates the amount that this top beam is left proud. It's actually not shown proud there in that particular view, but the part is left extra tall. Frame B is the only frame that doesn't have any across the top support, so this is a temporary 1x4 or something like that, just to help keep that frame from moving around. Frame C is the next frame in the bunk, in the forward part of the bunk. Frame C is where the galley starts, the galley box. And so there's the fore and aft part of C. Frame C does not have any gussets on this part of the on the forward side of the lower chine, because there is a floor timber running across the forward side of frame C. Also, this is I don't want to get anybody confused. So this bottom part of frame C we actually changed because of the way this cutout is. Let me jump back over to the kit parts. Frame C. There you can see we actually sent the bottom beam all the way out as opposed to sending C2 down. So basically the notch is on this piece as opposed to on that piece. And the reason for that is just for the integrity of that particular piece. Sorry, it took me a while to get back. It just looked a little bit fragile there, so just to clarify that. So there's frame D1. You can see the purple pieces again. Those would be not CNC cut, in addition to these other pieces behind this plywood cap over the mast support. The aft side of frame D1, of course, is a smooth bulkhead, watertight bulkhead, and we'll get to these notches in a second. When the frame D1 is assembled, we leave off the forward and aft top beams. So this beam here is glued across the aft top edge of frame D1, and this one across the forward edge of the mast support. But we want to leave this one off for the jig assembly so that it doesn't interfere with our support for supporting the bulkhead. And this one we want to leave off because a lot of it's going to get cut away when we bevel the top of D1 for the foredeck. Here we have frame D. Frame D is a pretty simple one. It's symmetrical fore and aft. And of course frame E with that crash box bulkhead on the aft face and the extra beam across the back side that supports the hardware for the baby stay. And here is another detail. The forward part of the beam on frame E is notched out to receive the king plank beams that support the foredeck and take the compression loads from the forestay. And also these top beams are notched, you'll notice, for a plywood butt block which joins the two halves of the deck. So those are all the frames. In addition to those assembled, you will also assemble the bunk side piece, which is the two pieces fore and aft of the bunk side, as well as the one of the cleats, the cleat that runs forward and aft, this one right here, and that would just stiffen up that panel. So this would be a little bit of a sub-assembly, and this leads us into the jig. Here we have the jig. I'm actually jump over to this one instead. So here we have the jig. So here's the strong back. These obviously are our temporary support pieces. And here you can kind of see what we've come up with. This is kind of the reveal. These two frames, B and C, they actually hang by this cockpit, by the bunk top sides, and so they don't require any other support than that. You can see the bunk sides are pre-notched for all the keel floor timbers, which locates those fore and aft. And the bunk tops, the bunk sides have these tabs, and now you can see the purpose of those notches in D1. The tabs slid through those notches, and then the bunk side can be secured to the mast support post. And in the back, we have similar tabs going through frame A. Yep, frame A. And can be fastened to the side of that vertical framing. The slanted frame, it's also notched out, and so the slanted frame drops right into the bunk sides. And of course, these two frames drop down into those notches as well, so that locates those frames. So really the only thing you're really having to do is establish the vertical height of the frame D1 and frame A, and all these other pieces should fall into place. There's a dimension provided for the location of the slant frame at the bottom, and it's clear of the floor by a little bit. The side panel also comes into play here, because the side panel in the kit, although it's made up of 3 pieces with butt blocks, these blue lines you can see are going to be CNC drawn on the inside of the side panel, and they all have the frame locations indicated on them. So if I go up to the next step here, you can see I've got the side panels bent around the jig, and this is helpful as a double check, but also for alignment of all these frames, both vertically and fore and aft, because once you assemble this side plank, you can't really get these frames out of alignment as long as they are lined up on these lines. And the side panel stringer that runs through the middle of the side panel, these notches on the frames, that locates each frame vertically, and the side lines locate it fore and aft. So in this render here, the assembly from the previous step is grayed out, and in order to establish the location of the transom, there are a number of options, but the easiest one is to actually use the cockpit sides from the kit. And the cockpit sides will butt right up to the aft face of frame S, and right up to the inside face of the transom, and that locates the transom exactly. The other way to do it, of course, is with the side panel. So you can temporarily hold the side panel up to the framing, and the side panel is cut exactly to size. We left it 1 millimeter long in case you're using 10 millimeter plywood for the kit, but I think everyone's going to be using 9 millimeter. So that establishes the fore and aft again and vertical location of the transom. And okay, it also establishes the location of frame D as well as frame E, which you can also get from the plans, but it's always good to do a double check, especially with any pre-cut parts in the kit. This is something that we stress with all of our kits, because all the parts are basically perfectly cut to size. You want to take advantage of any part that you can do a dry fit on, to see or to use that part as an alignment tool for the parts that will go on further down the process. Another detail here on frame E, due to the extra beam across the aft edge, we've notched out the vertical support for frame E so that the frame is plumb in the jig. On the stem, here are the stem bevels, slightly different top and bottom for the side panel itself. So the stem could be pre-beveled to these angles. Similar to the side panel, the first layer of bottom planking has all the pen lines drawn on it for the location of both the frames as well as any additional floor timbers. So for example, here is a floor timber that is installed across the bunk tops, so it would need to be installed prior to the bottom being glued down if you were permanently installing the bunk sides. That brings me to another note. These bunk sides do not have to be installed permanently in this way. You could, in fact, assemble the bunk sides dry with these butt blocks and use them just like we've used them here, but only as an alignment tool, because you can actually remove the bunk sides after the boat was flipped upright. And you would do that if, for example, you wanted to cut out the floor timbers and install the floor timbers later on in the process, rather than in situ here as shown. before the bottom planking was glued on. And it may turn out that that's an easier way to install these keel floor timbers, but I think it's possible that they could be installed into the jig pre-notched like we've shown here. But again, if that for some reason ends up not working out for people, then you would simply remove the bunk side panel after the boat was planked, install your keel timbers, and then reinstall the bunk side panels. So the bottom plank can also be used as an alignment tool, of course, to locate the frames and just more fore and aft position references, basically. I think that just about covers everything in this drawing. So in the next one up, you can see we've installed all of our battens. So the frames, while they are all pre-notched for the battens, they still require a fair amount of beveling. And so just to give you an example of one of the more extreme cases, up here on frame E, all the parts are cut out to the aft edge of the frame. So you can see, looking down this edge of frame E, the amount of beveling that's going to be needed on frame E. And also, while the aft part of the notch is CNC cut, the forward part of the notch is going to have to be let in further by the builder, either with like a die grinder tool or a chisel. And frame E is the most extreme example, of course, because it has the most taper to the bow, but frame D will also require beveling. Again, you can see here the forward edge of frame D is outside the line of the planking, and the aft edge is at the 0 line. Frame B, on the other hand, is almost a midships, and so requires almost no beveling. The shear clamp stringer in the plans is 22 millimeters by 70 millimeters, and it's shown here. The gray part here is a full 70 millimeter tall piece running fore to aft, but it's only needed the full height in the area of the cabin. So this could be installed as a full 70 millimeter tall stringer and then cut down along the side deck portion and the foredeck portion. But I think it could also be installed as a 40 millimeter by 22 millimeter piece, and then an additional piece glued to the top of it, which eventually supports the shear strake panel. Up at the forefoot here, you can see these two chine battens coming together alongside the knee, and so this is just a little bit of detail of how those would intersect with the knee. And we've already applied some bow round to the forefoot here, built into the inner stem, and for that reason the stem, the height of the stem does not match the height of the stem in the plans, but that's only because we've already removed some material from the bottom of the stem. The stem is pre-notched for the battens here and here. It's not notched for these two chine stringers because it would just waste away the stem here. So I think it is okay to butt these into the backside of the stem, but if not, these could be partially let into the stem, or the inside faces of these stringers could be tapered down so that not as much notching is required of the stem, so that we don't weaken the stem right across here. But in the kit, this area is not notched, although these intersections are drawn on the stem with pen. I think that about covers this drawing here. So again, the side and bottom panels can be thought of almost like templates at this stage, because they can be dry fit onto the side of the hull to double check the location and alignment of all the framing on the jig, and then they can be taken off the boat and to allow for the installation of all the battens. and all the beveling. Again, all these battens are just as per the plans. So the chine batten here, for example, is installed, and then it's beveled half and half exactly down the midline for the side panel. Just to reiterate, the side panel is cut exactly to shape. So the forward edge of the side panel will line up exactly with the forward edge of the inner stem, and the aft edge exactly with the aft edge of the transom. If you the planking schedule is as designed here would be side panel, then chine panel, then bottom panel. And the chine panel, this is what we're calling the chine plank here. It's also in 3 pieces with butt blocks. It would be installed in 3 pieces. So here we have the center portion of the chine panel with the butt blocks, and here I'll go ahead and put the side plank in place. So let's imagine we've just glued on the side planking. So there's the side planking in place, and it would require beveling along this edge to receive the chine plank that would overlap it ever so slightly. So here I'm going to install the middle portion of the chine plank next. Okay, so there's the middle portion of the chine plank. The chine plank is left with extra material on the top and bottom edges for beveling. So there should be plenty of material for gluing that on, and then the forward and aft portion of the chine panel would go down next. Again, there will be extra material along the top edge of the chine plank that would then be beveled off flat for the bottom planking. So finally, here we have the bottom plank. So that's the first layer of bottom planking. There's a butt block for the bottom planking here just aft of frame B, and also just ahead of frame D. That's the way it worked out in the sheets. Wanted to try to keep the joints out of the center portion of the boat, and I'll just jump down here and show you the second layer of bottom planking. Here is the butt block for the first layer of bottom planking, right here and here. The second layer of bottom planking, which is on the outside, is joined here just forward of the slanted frame, and here right between the first 2 keel timbers. And of course you'll have the keel plate spanning across those timbers, so there'll be no issue there. So now we've got the hull planked, and you would finish off your bow round, and the stem cap would be installed after planking. Here is the stem cap. Of course, it's larger than the stem, than the inner stem, so that it catches the outer face of the side planking. I have this drawing shows all of the additional pieces that would be installed after planking and flipping, with the exception of the bunk side if you decided to install your keel timbers after the fact. So if your keel timbers are already installed, then this is what you got. So there is a forward and aft floor beam. So we have number 5 here and number 7 here. We have a skeg doubler that goes above the skeg, and frame 7, or beam number 7, is dadoed out for that doubler. We have the doublers here on the inside of the hull for the chain plates. We have the bunk side, the cockpit side, which was being used, if you remember, to locate the slant frame and the transom, and that can be permanently installed after all these cockpit cleats are installed. And the cockpit side and the seat back are intended to be installed first, followed by the cockpit sole, seat top, and side deck. So I'll go ahead and move those down into position. So those, just the way the plywood overlaps, that's how those are, the order in which those are intended is the vertical panels first and then the horizontal panels like that. Here we have the framing for the bunk tops, which would be installed now. So we have this outer cleat that's just piecemeal fitted between the frames B and C, and some cleats across the tops of those partial bulkheads, as well as a forward and aft cleat for the bunk top panel. Here we have the cockpit sole, which is supplied in two pieces, a forward and aft piece. It's not notched out for this frame, and it, depending on what you want to do with it, I know some people are going to cut this up to create thwartship's sleeping bunk, so builders can do as they please with that. We have this little partial bulkhead which can be installed after the boat is flipped, as well as the framing for the crash box, and of course the top to the crash box, which the top for the crash box is maybe optional, but it could just be glassed over, but it's nice to have a solid top for that. Here we have the two king plank beams. These again are notched into the forward part of frame E, and they are also, I believe they're notched into, no they're not, I'm sorry, I believe they're notched into the stem. Okay, well, that may be something we need to add, is a notch in the stem for those king plank beams. So there's the first little correction I found. Okay, then we have the deck beams. There are 4 deck beams, as well as the stringer here along the top corner of the cabin that will support the shear strake. So here we have the shear strake. It's in 2 pieces with a butt block, and there's the butt block there just forward of frame D1. The shear strake has, again, those plywood doublers for the port lights, and we can put this into position. And there's the shear strake on. I won't bother with the port lights. We have a foredeck, of course, and we have a fore and an aft cabin top panel. Also, these fore and aft pieces here and here, and those are the fore and aft beams that are also included in the kit. The fore and aft butt block for the deck, these 3 pieces, is provided in the kit as one continuous piece of plywood which can be cut to fit. And again, these hatchways are shown in the plans, and the cabin top is not cut out for those 2 openings, just to give builders the different options. So I'll go ahead and glue down now the aft portion of the cabin top, which you'll notice is already notched for the observation dome. And if you are not going to be installing the observation dome, or you're going to do something totally different, your kit supplier can give you an extra piece of plywood or omit this sheet, because these 2 pieces take up just about a full sheet of plywood. Here they are right here. So if you didn't want this cut out, you're going to need an additional sheet, because these are fairly large panels. If you are going to do the observation dome, then you're ready to go. You'll first glue down these 2 cleat rails here, fore and aft, this one here, and that will support the sides of the dome, the front part of the dome, and then this dome floor, this orange piece here, would be installed if you were going to do the sliding hatch as designed. And then once the observation dome was installed, you could then cut away the center portion of this deck beam, as it wouldn't be needed. Here's a finished rendered model, and we've taken the liberty of putting a waterline on the boat. I have dimensions for this particular waterline. If anyone is interested, that'll be with the with the kit plans themselves. Of course, we have our B&B wind vane drawn on there, but anyone, the wind vane, I think guys have been looking at the various options, but I think this would be a good one. Quick plug for our wind vane: it does have the advantage that it tips up, so it's on a pivot and it can be rotated completely up out of the water for servicing. We had to develop a kick-up wind vane for our shallow draft boats, and people are waiting on the plans for that, but they'll be coming out shortly. These other parts, I think, are being worked on as we speak. The sails, the mast, the rigging, and possibly these pulpit hardware pieces. We've just rendered these quickly from the plans as provided, but it's nice to see the boat all painted. The shape looks really nice. I think it's a good looking boat. So that's all I have for the tour of the 580 kit. Hope you enjoyed, and as always, if you have any comments or suggestions for anything that I went over too fast or would like a more detailed look at, please just leave a link or a comment below. And as far as pricing for the kits, B&B Yacht Designs will be publishing a public estimate for a complete kit and all of the various options that we'll be offering very soon, within the week. And if you've already contacted me inquiring about a kit and haven't heard from me, shoot me another email, because I may have just overlooked you. So thanks a lot. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again real soon.